the various CSS related inheritance and cascading, how the concept of inheritance and cascading works. So next important, after understanding the inheritance and cascading, so we need to know about the other points. Step by step we will see. So already we discussed the selectors and how to work with the measurement units and all. Yeah. And let's detailedly discuss about the other options, how to use them. Actually, after understanding all the basic in CSS, generally we need to know about one more concept, that is CSS, generally CSS box model. Means to properly work with CSS, you should know about CSS box model. So you need to understand the CSS box model actually. So actually everything in CSS has a box around it. So that is the reason understanding box is very important. So working with has a box around it. So understanding understanding boxes is important to design proper layout in CSS. Actually, boxes is very important. We generally call this as a CSS box model. Technically, we call this as it is often called as CSS box model. It is often called as box model. So how this box model works, we will see. Means how to use this box model. What are the options for box model? How do we deal with the options in the box model? Let's see. So we need to understand for the box model, we need to understand so we need to know about the appearances. So display, how we can manage for the content actually. So the attribute, the display attribute is used to handle the box model for CSS layout actually. Display attribute is responsible for managing everything, right? Technically. How we can keep the content, how we can design the content. So what it actually comprises of, we will see that also. So generally, the box model comprises of three important things. Means display attribute is for layout. Not only that, a display attribute later we will see. Actually, The box model comprises of few things, like we have a content box, we have a padding box, we have border box, we have margin box. These are the important options about the box model technically. So generally, the content box, that means the content box is nothing but I will give an option here, a simple point here. Content box means actually content box is nothing but the area, so where your content is displayed. Actually, it can be defined. So it can be defined by using the properties, like width and height. We can define that by using width and height. That is actually content box. That means how much width and height should be for your content, how much content it should, how much area it should occupy. The padding box is nothing but the padding usually is the padding is around the content. The padding is around the content as a white space. So its size can be controlled by using padding attribute, property. Yeah. So we have content box and we have padding box. We have border box. That means actually the border box wraps around the content or padding, Technically it wraps around the content or padding actually, and usually it is controlled by using border property. It is controlled by using border property. So border box, it is controlled by using the border property actually. That is important. I will show practically and these options, right? And we have margin box. Actually, margin box is nothing but technically the margin is the margin is the outmost layer wrapping the content, padding and border also. So border, so it configures the white space around border. Its size can be defined by using margin property. So technically, when you are designing anything, You need to understand these 4 boxes: content box, padding box, border box, and margin. That means how we can configure them. What are the attributes we use for that? And how do we define the options? We will see that. Technically, how we can manage that, right? So what are the options for designing and configuring them? So what you need is usually to understand this. So you need the layout to design first. To understand the box model, you need the layout to design, right? Actually, in the browser tools, we can handle that: width, height, margins, padding, how to configure and how to use them. First, I will just show you the basic point about what are these contents actually. So diagrammatically simple. Suppose you see, actually, we generally have our content. We have our content. So this content have a width and height. Width and height. So that means you configured this content related width. This is width. The content related width is defined here. And content related height is defined here. So we have content related width and height. So we have width and we have height. That is the height and width of content. So how much width and height you want for the content, that is defined. Now around the content, if you want a space around the content, if you want a space, then that is called as around the content. If you want space, that is called as padding. Padding is the space around the content, how much space you want around the content. And the border is defined. So I will take a thick one. So the border is defined. Around the padding and content. Around the padding and content, the border is defined. So this is actually referred as border. So this is border. And around the border, some space is defined around the border, that is border. And that is simply border, right? Just I give here, this is border. Okay. So around the border, so some space is defined. Around the border, some space is defined. Around the border, some space is defined. Around the border, some space is defined. This is the space around the border. And this is referred as margin actually. This is margin. So that is our contents actually. And here, the rest of our concept, that means this is actually your page. This is the page. That is the page. And page have a margin, page have padding, page have height, width around the contents actually. So this is referred as border. So that means the distance between the content, the space between the content and the border, that is what actually, so the padding is. You can have a border and we can have some margin. Margin is space between the border and it. That's the margin actually. So technically we have content and we have the padding, so we have the margins and we have the borders. And for that, we need these properties. So what are the properties required? I will show you just roughly this diagram I'm giving here, a rough diagram here. So what is that box model is actually. Now, how do we define what are the basic properties actually? The basic property width, height. We are configuring the width and height. So first important is the width and height is defined for the content box. Content box. Let's go to the design. I will just create a simple folder here. So let's add some options. So I will just give here as a new file. Let's add as box layout.html. Now here we have doc type HTML head and title box layout. Okay, in the body section, so here we are designing a simple div, and in the div we have, that is the main div. So this div I will give a class as container. Okay, in the div I have another div and I will give the class as box. Inside that I will keep some content, that means some paragraph information we will copy and keep that inside that. So let's copy some paragraph and keep inside that box. Okay, now we are displaying that. Initially we are displaying that. All right, we are configuring it. So here we see, let's run this and see. Initially we have the paragraph like this. Okay, for container I will go to style and a dot container. Container is the class. For the container class, I am giving temporarily background color. So background color, some light gray, some background color light gray. Okay, the container have a background color, that is container actually. Container is occupying entire page, right? That is currently it is there. Yeah, inside that container, so we have a box. So dot box. Box, how much width and height you want for the content. That means I will just define width for the content is 200 pixels and height for the content is 200 pixel. So that is the width and height for the box. You can see that is box. That means your container is different and box is different. So that means here I'm defining height width as some 400. Now it will be like this. I will just keep the box here and height as some 150, something like this, and it will adjust like this. So see here, the container is the outside part, the box height and width. So that means this is the first box. We are defining the box height and width. That means content related, how much width and height you want. That you have to mention by using content box. Actually, this is content box example. That means the content box. Actually, for the content box, I will give a background color as white. So content box background color is white. You see, content box background color is white. And it is exactly on the container. It is exactly on the container. Because this right side gray you are watching, actually it is not right side, it is over it, right? That means here I want some space between the content. So outside the content, I want some space. Then how you define? Outside the content, I want space. Then box is our content. Then it can use padding. Padding. Here, padding have 4 directions to define. That means you can define padding left, padding right, padding top, padding bottom. If I give padding, how much? So 20 pixels padding. Then in all directions, it will be 20 pixels. In all directions, it will be 20 pixels. 20 pixels. So that means it will adjust the space. So the background color I will remove for that. Just to see the padding, you can see the space is adjusted, 20 pixels. Now I am using 50 pixels padding. Then space around this content will be increased. For the content, I will give align. That means text align, justify. Later we will learn about justified alignments and all. Actually, this is content box. This is the content box. And the space around the content box is called padding. Currently, we have padding. So, and I'm just first showing you example here. Now it will have a border. That means border is the content which is around the padding, So border 2 pixel solid. That means the border is around the padding. You can see it is around the padding. Around the padding. That means, so this is content. And this space inside it is padding. That is padding. Now I want some space between border and its main container it is having. Then what we can do is we can define margin as 20 pixel. So then margin adjusts the space. So margin as some 50 pixel, then it will adjust the space. That means outside the border. So technically outside the border, how much space it want. Suppose the container is not there. That means container is not defined with any effects. You can see this is how it displays. Now in this, what you can understand, that means actually we have body. I'm just giving body. So background, so suppose background color for body is some gray. So like this, background color for the body is gray. It will be like this. And a box I'm giving, so background color as some white. Then it will be, box will be white here. Now what is the key point here to understand? What is padding, what is margin, and what is content? That means how much width and height you want for this content. That is width and height, content box. How much space around the content you want. That is padding. And after the padding, so border can be defined. That means border wraps around the padding. And margin is outside the border. How much space you want. So how much space you want. So that you define by using margin. So here, So I will just take a snap here just to write some description about this. Actually, what is present inside this is what is present inside this area, right? Let's copy that. That means let's copy that. That means what is present inside that part, right? And open this. Actually, this is in the MS Paint. I'm just showing you that design. So this is. Now what you see here is in this, just an example to show you. So this is the content box. That is the content box. I will just give as content box. That is the content box. That means how much space it is occupied. That is actually content box. This is content box. This is content box. Just I'm giving that point here, content box. And the content box actually up to this width and height. How much width and height? This is actually content box. That means I can say that, so this is your content box, right? And around the space, around it, what we have usually, so this is called actually, this is the padding box. That is the padding box. This is the padding box. That is the padding box. That means the space around is padding. Around is padding. That means the white space around it is padding. That means in all directions, so left, right, top, bottom, it is padding. This is the padding box. The padding box in all directions, so it is padding. So here also I will give some padding. Padding, right? This is the padding box. That means in all directions, it is defined there. That is the padding box actually. So that is the padding box. That means in the four directions, you can see the space between the content, outside that content. This is padding actually. This is padding. And outside that, whatever you see outside it, this is actually margin. That is actually margin. That means all the direction, it is margin. So how much space it is keeping, that is margin. So this is a general example of understanding. I just give a copy for this. This is just an example for understanding the box, how it is designed. That means the margin box and the padding box and the content box. For that, this is the program. So this is a sample program just to understand how you can define the height and width for the content. That means content box is height and width. Outside space is padding. And outside padding, you will have a border. And actually here, so this comes as border. The box is border. That means the margin, between the margin and here, we have a border. So that means it is defined as border. Actually, this black, what we have here, this black, so that is border. That is actually border. So this will be a better option for understanding. That is actually border. So let's keep this roughly. I will just keep that there. So that is how it appears actually, how it appears. That means while working with layouts and designing, so in CSS, first you need to understand what is margin, what is padding, and what is width and height. So width and height, it refers to the content. Padding refers outside space of the content. Border comes outside the padding. If there is padding, outside the padding, border will come. Margin comes with the space outside the border. Outside the border, whatever space you see, that is margin. That is how we need to configure our contents. And how do we define the margins, the padding, and borders? That we can see. Means how we define the margins, padding, and border. We can see that. We'll see one example now. That means how we can manage it. Let's see how we can handle them. For that, what are the attributes we need to understand? That means first option, width and height we already know. Width and height we already know. Then we need to know about how do we configure the options like margins and padding and borders. Margins, padding, and borders. How to define them? How we can configure and define them. So for that, what attributes? Already we saw what is margin. Then what are the options for margin? So margin options, what we have is, I will create a simple table for those options. So here we will just define the property, right? So the property and description, right? Description. And actually we have two important options. One is we have margin property. So margin. So that means it sets margin all sides. It sets margin all sides. Now we can define. So margin. So we can define margin top. So that means so above it sets margin above the border. So margin bottom, this it sets margin below the border. And we have margin. So we have margin left. So it sets margin left to border. So left to border and margin right. So it sets margin right to border. That means it will set the spacing. Actually, it will set the spacing. So in all directions, you can define the margin. So how to configure and use the margin here. So margin can be defined with all these attributes. Let's see how we can manage. How we can define that. So first, we will put this margin. That means this is for margin property. So margin property and description. We will see how we can use it first. So generally, when you are displaying the content here, we have defined the margin 50 pixels. So it puts all direction, actually, all direction. So the right side margin you can understand only if there is some content beside it, actually. So in all directions, this is the original size of our page. In all directions, it will keep that. Currently, you can observe that the top and left correctly because there is nothing below. There is nothing beside. If there is anything below and beside, then obviously it will keep that. Later, I will keep that option. Suppose I have another box. And you can see that box. That means below the box and above the box, the same space will be maintained, left and right. Left and right also. So, but boxes are currently one below another. I will keep floating them left side, then they will be side by side. They will be side by side. Now you can see more gap because here between these two, because floating later I will tell you. You can see more space between them because actually the left box is having margin. That means left box is already having margin. That means actually what happening is the left box is already having margin. That means left box is already having margin up to here. And this right box is also having the margin. So it both margins, this is this margin, this is this margin. So it have the same size margins. So that's the reason you can see more gap here, right? And there is no content beside this. Again, there is no content beside this. So that means in all directions, it will adjust that. It will adjust that. Suppose that is margin or direction. Suppose I am giving, so margin left. Margin left, we have specified. So the option like some, by default it is 50 pixel. I say 10 pixel. Left margin 10 pixel. Then you can see the left margin will be 10 pixel reduced. So left margin only reduced, 10 pixel reduced. I want right margin also to reduce. So then margin right also 10 pixel. That means left and right margins will be reduced. Now they can come more closer. Similarly, so top margin we need to adjust. Then so margin top is some 10 pixel. Then top margin is also adjusted here. Some space adjusted here. So that is how we can define the margin. So top margin, suppose I want 30 pixel. Top margin is 30 pixel, left margin is 10 pixel. And suppose right margin is 20 pixel, then right side space will increase a little bit. So that is how we can define the margin, how we can configure the margin. So technically, the margin is defined. So margin is defined. So for contents, for margin is defined for the contents. Okay. Generally, the content outside is padding. The padding outside is border. Border outside is margin. So this is one simple example of how the margins are defined. That means in all directions, how margin is defined. Later in several examples we will keep. First we are understanding base by level by level, one by one. Here our intention is to understand what margin does. And very important, margin can have a negative value. So margin can have a negative value. That means we can collapse the options actually. That means margin can have a negative value. If you define a negative value, so that means the margin will collapse. Usually margin will collapse. And it is important to understand. So different alignments for the margins also. That means you can define alignments. Later we will see example. Initially, suppose see, so the negative options are defined. That means we are configuring the negative options. So that means see, the boxes are defined with left margin minus 10. Left margin is minus 10. And you can see it goes more left side. Suppose minus 30, then you can see that minus 30. And minus 50, then you can see that it is moving towards the left, it will be moving. right? That means we are moving that towards the left minus 60 left margin, then it is moving. Because both are the same boxes we given. That's the reason you can see that border looks like same, but you can see left side space is removed. So if it is plus 60, then you can see left side space will increase. So that means when you are reducing, then it overlaps onto that. When it overlaps onto that. Suppose I am defining top margin. So top margin as negative minus 30, minus 30. It will go above the page. So because it starts with actually 0 exact at the border page. And if I say minus 10, then it will move above. That means negative values will always keep above and left. So that means you can create overlapping of content. You can create overlapping of content. That's what actually we can do for content adjusting here. So that means negative value will overlap. So one simple point is here is, so margin can overlap with a negative value. It can overlap with a negative value. So you can just define, so the margin with a negative value, just roughly I'm defining like this. So just for our understanding sake, with a negative value. Then based on other contents available, if other contents are available, then it can handle the overlaps, right? Now, another option is, while working with margins, is margins have a collapsing concept also. Margin have collapsing. Margin can collapse. Actually, if two elements whose margins are both positive and they will combine and become into one margin, that means two individual elements with both positive or both negative, actually the margin will collapse on one another. We generally call as collapsing of margins. That means they combine actually. So many people say overlap, right? And you can say collapse. Because technically collapse is the word which is used regularly. So when you are working with the margins, it can collapse. So the collapsing of margin is nothing but, for example, suppose how it can collapse. That is already you saw here. Suppose we have some contents. Let's keep some contents here. Let's say collapse .html roughly. So I'm defining a simple HTML head title. Okay, collapse. But that is nothing special actually. The point is, suppose we have a div and we have a class, some container. So container. Okay, we are not giving any effects for the container. So in this we have a div. Suppose we say some paragraph. So this is first paragraph. One paragraph information is present here. I will just copy one paragraph of information there and I will keep that paragraph there. So here the paragraph is here. And another paragraph inside it. That means we have two paragraphs of information there in a container. So this is a class as para 1, and this is class as para 2. Two are there. Now, usually when I run this, you can see, so it is having this option. Now we are adjusting the content here. This is the content here actually. Suppose I am defining the class style and the dot container, and here container. So width is some 2 pixel. So width is some, so 200 pixel or 400 pixel. Okay. So that is the width of the container. And in that we have the contents. And we have 2 paragraphs of information defined there. Then usually what happens is the paragraphs, when you configure for paragraph, so dot para 1. So for that, we will put some border. Actually, both paragraph, let's keep P. P is for content. This is content. So content have a border. Border has 2 pixels solid. And you can see the content is having the border. Content is having the border. So paragraphs both are having border. So now container is also having a border. Some 2 pixel, so some dotted. Okay, now you can see the container is also having a border. So that is some double. Okay, the container have a border. So I'll keep dotted on. Okay, fine. So that is the container. Inside the container, you have 2 paragraphs. Now, when you are adjusting the margin for these paragraphs, that means for para 1, I am defining margin bottom. So that means margin bottom means below that, how many pixels. So margin bottom is some 50 pixels. So margin bottom will be 50 pixels. You can see it adjusts. And what we are giving here, margin top. So for para 2, dot para 2. Para 2, margin top, we defined 30 pixels. 30 pixels. That means what happens actually is margin below is 50 and 30 pixels. I save this actually. Now you can see that the margin top is 30 pixels and margin bottom of above is 50 pixels. Then here I am giving minus 30 pixels margin top, and you can see it shifts more above. And here, so that is minus some 60 pixels and it will move more above. That means it is collapsing the margin. You may have a doubt now what happened to this margin bottom, because para 1 is already having a bottom margin. Now what is happening is this paragraph which is below, it is collapsing. That means for para 2, I said background color, actually some light yellow. Some light yellow is the background color for the para 2. You can see the para 2 has a light yellow. That means that box is having that option. And you can see that both are collapsing here. So background color. So I defined some light green. So you can see, so both are collapsing here. I'm just giving more, suppose 80 pixel, minus 80 pixel, then it collapse more. That means actually the first paragraph contains information up to this. And when you are giving both positive values, so both positive values, then what happens is they will adjust the space. Top margin is 80, then it will adjust the space. And once you give the negative value, negative value, then you can see that it will collapse. And here also bottom also negative value, then you can see both will collapse on each other. Collapse on each other. This is called collapsing of margins. This is collapsing of margins. Usually collapsing of margins will happen when you are defining the negative values. So that means the margins will collapse on one each other and the content will be displayed on one each other. So that is what actually the collapsing of margins. This type of arrangement also required so many times, because many times you can see such type of arrangement. You may ask like why I need collapsing like concept. You need that collapsing like concept. For example, suppose I will show you why you need such collapsing technique. This is actually collapsing technique. So I will just roughly keep this in the example. That means here how the collapsing works. Why we need this collapsing? I will show you one practical point here. So usually what happens is, suppose, so we have an image, I'll say header. Okay, header is having an image, source is in images, // images. So banner some 2.jpg, banner 2.jpg. Actually, this is the banner. So, and this is the original banner. This is 100%. Okay, this is 100%. And usually the width of banner is 100%. 100%. The width for the banner is 100%. That is 100%. And suppose I am defining, so the height also 100%. 100%. So this is already 100% because that is not with related to body. Related to body. So that means, for example, image height is not related to body. For example, what I am doing is, so we are defining img. Img height is inherit. It inherits, height inherits. That means it inherits the body. Currently, how much body is there? Only this much content. So that means entire page is not the body. So it will inherit that and it will use that. How much body you have defined, based on that it will adjust. That already we discussed how inherit works. Currently, what is point here is, so the width is 100% set. Okay. Below this header, below this image, actually the header contains an image. And in this we have a section. And usually section is below the header. And I defined section. And section is configured with background color as so light orange, right? So something like white. I will just keep white. So that means the section is defined with the white, and section have a height of some 300 pixel. Section have a height of 300 pixel, and section have width of some 100%. 100% width section. And you can see this is section height and width is defined there. Inside the section, I can have some content. So inside the section I can have some content, some Amazon shopping, something like this you have. That is what actually the section is. Now, usually what happens is, means we can put some boxes there, images there. In this section, we have align centered. And in this, we have some image source is equal to images and some speaker.jpg. So width and 100, height is also 100. We define like this. That means we have some images kept there. So some earpods.jpg, some shirt shoe.jpg, some shoe.jpg like this. So shoe.jpg something. Okay, we have all these options defined there. This is the content. Now, usually what we are doing is here we are collapsing the section. Section have margin top for the section. I am defining as suppose minus 200 pixel. Minus 200 pixel for margin, and you can see it comes above the content. Above the content. That means it comes above the content. And suppose I said margin in all directions is some 100 pixel. So that means, so you can see it goes down. Why? Because it's not collapsing now. It's coming, pushing down. So already margin top is 200 pixels, then it moves up the content. Actually, it is on the header now. So that means it is minus 300 pixel. That means it is here. So I'm defining, suppose say margin left is 100 pixel. So that means left margin is 100 pixel. That means it is over that content, This is collapsing margin. So that means the section is defined with this. So section is using this. In the it is displaying over. Suppose section is having some border, like border as some 4 pixel solid. And you can see here, section border, you can observe here, it is collapsing behind. That means actually this header is over the section. Header is over the section. That means header image is over the section. Later, how we can send it back, how it send forward, we will see later. But observe carefully, the section is actually, you can see it is behind the header. Suppose now I am configuring in this way. Suppose I am removing this section area here, and I kept above the header, section above the header, then it will be in this way. Now I am moving this, not 300 pixels, then it will be in this way. It will not overlap on that. It is above. And it is having some white color in the background. Now here it is minus 300 and its section is below the header. It collapsed the margin. And image, how you can keep that. So outside, that we will see later. That means over it, outside it, how we can define. So suppose this image, so we have IMG. So that means it can have options like transparency. That means opacity 0.3. That is the opacity for the image. You can see it is transparent. You can see the background for that. So that means opacity is some 0.6, then it will be like this. And 0.7, then it will be like this. The opacity we are increasing. So you know already 9 is the maximum. Right? We are keeping the content in this way. And usually we don't want any border. So just I showed you the border to understand its range, how it is. Actually, this is how the content. That means opacity, if you are increasing, so 1, that means this is 1. 1 is the opacity, that is it will remove the transparency. This and actually our background image that you keep on the header, if there are more contents, you can freeze it and you can scroll the rest of the content above. This type of arrangement and everything you will observe regularly in shopping sites. Like see, suppose I open Amazon, and you can observe carefully in this Amazon, the image is you can see this is image. That means this is the image. You can see actually that image is occupying up to this part. You can see on that image, you have these boxes. On that image, you have these boxes. That means these boxes are shifted above that image. How it is possible to shift them above the image? You can see the image is behind those boxes, behind those boxes. So that means actually images are not defined with any padding or anything. So when you define header image, they are transparent. Actually, it applies for all of them. It will apply for all of them. That means in a header, so image opacity you are setting, it will work only for the header image, right? So that opacity you are changing 0.5. That means it will work only for header image. Opacity will be changing. And important is the other contents are over it. The other contents are over it. So we are keeping the other contents over it. That means generally in the section wherever image is there, suppose we have a border for that. So or say, yeah, border for that, 2 pixel solid border for that. And you can see they have border. And we have a background color as white for that. So they have a background color white. But transparency is important for them. And one more option is padding. Padding is 30 pixel. So they will have more space here. That means how you can keep the content outside and above the other contents. This is done by using collapse of margin. How to design this type of layout one above another, that I will show you in the next level. For that, we need to understand some more points about the margin. So currently, we are just working with concept of margins, how we can define. And where you need the collapsing of margins. So this is type of environment we need collapsing of margin. That is an example for collapsing of margins. Now with margins, with borders and with the backgrounds, how we can keep the content in a correct way. We will see some examples now. Means we will design some layouts and prepare some examples. So we will try to implement some real world screens with the help of these margins and all, how we can manage. Then you will get perfection on margin. That we'll see tomorrow, right? So in tomorrow's session, we will design some examples by using these margins. Then you will get more clarity on how to handle margin, padding, and borders. The box model, we need to get perfect. Tomorrow, we will see some examples on that. Okay, right.